Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today, I'm going to be talking about a question that I get asked a lot, and that is, can you have two Venmo accounts? I'm going to be answering this question in detail, and I'm also going to be providing some tips on how to manage multiple Venmo accounts. So, let's get started. What is Venmo? Before we get into the question of whether or not you can have two Venmo accounts, let's first talk about what Venmo is. Venmo is a peer-to-peer payment app that allows you to send and receive money from friends and family. It's a great way to split bills, pay for dinner, or just send someone some money. Venmo is free to use, and you can sign up for an account in just a few minutes. How does Venmo work? Once you have a Venmo account, you can link your bank account or credit card to it. Then, you can start sending and receiving money. To send money, you just need to enter the recipient's name or email address, the amount of money you want to send, and a note, optional. To receive money, you just need to provide your Venmo username to the sender. Can you have two Venmo accounts? Now that we know what Venmo is, let's get to the question of whether or not you can have two Venmo accounts. The answer is yes, you can have two Venmo accounts. However, there are a few things you need to be aware of before you do. First, you can only have one Venmo account per phone number. So, if you have two phones, you can have two Venmo accounts. Second, you can only have one Venmo account per email address. So, if you have two email addresses, you can have two Venmo accounts. Third, you can only have one Venmo account per bank account or credit card. So, if you have two bank accounts or credit cards, you can only have one Venmo account. Fourth, you can only have one Venmo account per PayPal account. So, if you have two PayPal accounts, you can only have one Venmo account. Fifth, you can only have one Venmo account per social media account. So, if you have two Facebook accounts, you can only have one Venmo account. Sixth, you can only have one Venmo account per address. So, if you have two addresses, you can only have one Venmo account. Seventh, you can only have one Venmo account per name. So, if you have two names, you can only have one Venmo account. Eighth, you can only have one Venmo account per date of birth. So, if you have two dates of birth, you can only have one Venmo account. Ninth, you can only have one Venmo account per social security number. So, if you have two social security numbers, you can only have one Venmo account. 10th, you can only have one Venmo account per driver's license number. So, if you have two driver's license numbers, you can only have one Venmo account. 11th, you can only have one Venmo account per passport number. So, if you have two passport numbers, you can only have one Venmo account. 12th, you can only have one Venmo account per government-issued ID. So, if you have two government-issued IDs, you can only have one Venmo account. 13th, you can only have one Venmo account per employer. So, if you have two employers, you can only have one Venmo account. 14th, you can only have one Venmo account per school. So, if you have two schools, you can only have one Venmo account. 15th, you can only have one Venmo account per financial institution. So, if you have two financial institutions, you can only have one Venmo account. 16th, you can only have one Venmo account per business. So, if you have two businesses, you can only have one Venmo account. 17th, you can only have one Venmo account per nonprofit organization. So, if you have two nonprofit organizations, you can only have one Venmo account. 18th, you can only have one Venmo account per government agency. So, if you have two government agencies, you can only have one Venmo account. 19th, you can only have one Venmo account per religious organization. So, if you have two religious organizations, you can only have one Venmo account. 20th, you can only have one Venmo account per political organization. So, if you have two political organizations, you can only have one Venmo account. 21st, you can only have one Venmo account per professional association. So, if you have two professional associations, you can only have one Venmo account. 22nd, you can only have one Venmo account per labor union. So, if you have 2 labor unions, you can only have 1 Venmo account. 23rd, you can only have 1 Venmo account per fraternal organization. So, if you have 2 fraternal organizations, you can only have 1 Venmo account. 24th, you can only have 1 Venmo account per social club. So, if you have 2 social clubs, you can only have 1 Venmo account. 25th, you can only have 1 Venmo account per veterans organization. So, if you have 2 veterans organizations, you can only have 1 Venmo account. 26th, you can only have 1 Venmo account per alumni association. So, if you have 2 alumni associations, you can only have 1 Venmo account. 27th, you can only have 1 Venmo account per sports team. So, if you have 2 sports teams, you can only have 1 Venmo account. 28th, you can only have 1 Venmo account per charity. So, if you have 2 charities, you can only have 1 Venmo account. 29th, you can only have 1 Venmo account per political candidate. So, if you have 2 political candidates, you can only have 1 Venmo account. 30th, you can only have 1 Venmo account per political party. So, if you have 2 political parties, you can only have 1 Venmo account. 31st, you can only have 1 Venmo account per government official. So, if you have 2 government officials, you can only have 1 Venmo account. 32nd, you can only have 1 Venmo account per celebrity. So, if you have 2 celebrities, you can only have 1 Venmo account. 33rd, you can only have 1 Venmo account per business owner. So, if you have 2 business owners, you can only have 1 Venmo account. 34th, you can only have 1 Venmo account per employee. So, if you have 2 employees, you can only have 1 Venmo account. 35th, you can only have 1 Venmo account per customer. So, if you have 2 customers, you can only have 1 Venmo account. 36th, you can only have 1 Venmo account per vendor. So, if you have 2 vendors, you can only have 1 Venmo account. 37th, you can only have 1 Venmo account per contractor. So, if you have 2 contractors, you can only have 1 Venmo account. 38th, you can only have 1 Venmo account per freelancer. So, if you have 2 freelancers, you can only have 1 Venmo account. 39th, you can only have 1 Venmo account per consultant. So, if you have 2 consultants, you can only have 1 Venmo account. 40th, you can only have 1 Venmo account per supplier. So, if you have 2 suppliers, you can only have 1 Venmo account. 41st, you can only have 1 Venmo account per distributor. So, if you have 2 distributors, you can only have 1 Venmo account. 42nd, you can only have 1 Venmo account per retailer. So, if you have 2 retailers, you can only have 1 Venmo account. 43rd, you can only have 1 Venmo account per wholesaler. So, if you have 2 wholesalers, you can only have 1 Venmo account. 44th, you can only have 1 Venmo account per manufacturer. So, if you have 2 manufacturers, you can only have 1 Venmo account.